Welcome back to Marshland Histories. We're continuing our A to Z of Carlton Colville, uncovering the stories, characters and landmarks that have helped shape village life. Here's part 2, N to Z. N is for Newtown. Back in 1936, the Suffolk Chronicle and Mercury looked at Carlton Colville and said strangers might think they were watching the transformation of a village into a prosperous town. Since the late 1980s, more than 2,300 new homes have appeared at Rosedale, Carlton Park, the Dales, and the Oaks. So in 2011, Carlton Colville officially became a town. It wasn't just a recognition of its size, but a cunning plan in many ways to preserve its own identity and not become just part of Lowestoft. Many people still talk about Old Carlton and New Carlton. They might have grown together on the map, but not necessarily in people's minds. O is for Old School. For nearly 90 years, generations of Carlton Colville children learned their 3 R's at the village's old school. Built in 1843, it taught children from the age of 5 to 14 in just 3 classrooms. It was a proper rural Victorian school. Attendance could be hit by harvest work, fruit picking, fishing trips, bad weather when some children simply did not have suitable boots or any boots at all. By the 1920s, inspectors decided the school had had its day. It stood at a dangerous road junction with no proper playground, and a new school was built and opened in Hall Road in 1931. But the old school's story didn't end there. For the next 50 years, it became the village church hall, hosting the brownies, the guides, harvest suppers, jumble sales, and Christmas parties, before becoming lovingly converted into a private home in 1985. P is for Post Office, which was originally at 44 The Street in Carlton Colville and taken over by the Ramsey family in 1912. Here you could buy your halfpenny stamps, cash a postal order, or collect your old age pension, newly introduced in 1908. For the next 4 decades, when you walked in the door, the post office counter was on the right, and on the left a general shop where Edna Ramsey sold everything from bolts of cloth to boiled sweets. The Ramseys stayed until 1961, when the post office moved to Rounces Lane. Ted and Pat Pitts took over in 1967, when the thud of the date stamp on pensions and savings books was still part of everyday life. Q is for Queen. When Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee in June 2022, Carlton Colville joined the party when more than 1,000 people turned up at the recreation ground for a modern-day village fete. Rewind 45 years earlier, back to June 77 and the Silver Jubilee. The recently opened community centre hosted a children's fancy dress competition, while neighbours from Beach Road, Poplar Road and Shore Avenue gathered in the church hall for a Jubilee party, with Mr. Reginald Pye keeping the record spinning all afternoon.
Roll out the barrel.
R is for the Red House. For generations of Carlton folk, the Besfords were the Red House. Percy and Wanda Besford took over the pub in 1948 until 78. Then their son Billy took over the helm with his wife Wendy, and they kept the family name above the door until 2003. And here's Billy himself, standing second from the right with the Carlton Red House football team in the mid-80s. And on the far left, kit sponsor Mike from the garage just across the road from the pub, which leads us neatly on to S is for Stanton's Garage. If your car's been making a funny noise or refusing to start or simply needs filling up, there's always been Stanton's. The garage was built in 1972 and run by Pops and Betty Page. Then along came Mike and Norma Stanton in 1980, who made it their own, winning FINA Garage of the Year in 1985 and certainly winning over the locals too. And look at that, petrol, 39.9p a litre back in 1990. Not bad, is it? Since 2019, their son Richard and his wife Steph have been running the business. So from the days of the Ford Capri and Reliant Robin to the hybrid and electric cars of today, it's still the same family garage keeping Carlton on the road. T is for teachers. For generations of Carlton children, that first friendly face was Miss Coombs, who taught at Carlton Primary from the 40s to the mid-70s. She comforted countless youngsters through those first wobbly days at school. Then came the brand new middle school at Gisborne in the mid-60s. For the next 5 decades, every local child spent 4 years in bright red jumpers and striped ties. In my day, in the late 70s and early 80s, the head was Mr. Jones, his deputy, Mr. Sheldrake, Mr. Dan in the woodwork room, musical maestro, Mr. Walsh, football with the tall and lean Mr. Fuchs in his blue tracksuit, and Mrs. Harold, who taught me maths and cookery, where I made an excellent cauliflower cheese, although I could never quite crack long division. U is for Uncle Jack. Every Carlton family seemed to have an Uncle Jack, or knew someone just like him. Always a flat cap and always a roll-up perched on his bottom lip. Mine was actually my great-uncle, my mum's uncle. He lived down Short Lane, near Plummer's shop. Back in the 1920s, he worked with horses on local farms, but never really took to tractors, so stuck to hoeing, hedging, and clearing ditches. In his working days, he'd always leave home with a barley water bottle full of cold tea, but only wore his false teeth for special occasions. Wouldn't have him in for going to work, would he? V is for Valentine, Father Valentine. I wonder if you've heard of this unusual local tradition that used to take place on Valentine's Day each year. Father Valentine would knock on your door and disappear, and perhaps leave a gift of sweets or a little toy. Here's a poem about what happened in our house. Father Valentine was my mother, like her mother before her. A local custom, besides the flowers and cards with hearts, a sort of tea-time Santa who interrupted freezing February. The brown coat was bear-like. The Wellingtons weren't the best for running in. The stocking over the head was just plain disturbing, and topped off by an old wig, matted. Did she change in the garage after she made her excuses? Oh, just popping out to the postbox. Not long before a knock from the back door. No one there, but slumped on the step, a bag with a string attached, leading to nothing but blackness. I reached down, guessing sweets, but each time I tried to grab hold, the bag was tugged from my hand. I followed until the string went slack, the prize at my feet. Once, and only once, I went too far and came face to face. Boo! Word spread, and long after my childhood, she'd dig out the wig for other kids in the village. The year she stopped, she blamed the boys, grown up too quick, not satisfied with the marshmallow cone or licorice stick. W is for War Hero. Carlton Cobal's Ernest Spratt Solomon was one of the village's First World War heroes, although he never received a medal for bravery. Joining up, aged 34, he survived the entire Western Front campaign. After returning home to work as a bricklayer, he fell from a scaffold and tragically died from his injuries. Yet perhaps the finest tribute came from a fellow soldier who said, I once saw Ernest Solomon go into no man's land 7 times in one night, and each time he brought back a wounded man. He ought to be covered with Victoria Crosses. X is for X marks a spot. For one of Carlton's smallest landmarks, tucked into the trunk of a magnificent oak, is the village's mysterious fairy door. According to legend, fairy doors are magical portals that appear and disappear without warning. Carlton's portal first appeared in the early 1980s when, as local folklore says, a rather inventive dad painted a tiny fairy door and doorbell on the tree to delight his 2 young daughters, but soon captured the imagination of the whole village. Then, in 2014, the magic returned. This time, the door was beautifully crafted from stained pine, complete with a pointed Gothic frame, tiny black hinges, and a heart-shaped peephole. By then, health and safety had clearly caught up with the fairies because the door was permanently locked. I mean, you wouldn't want local children disappearing through a magical portal, would you? Whether created by a Carlton craftsman or fairy folk, it shows the smallest landmark can leave the biggest memories. Y is for Youth Club. For generations of Carlton youngsters, Thursday night meant one thing: the Youth Club at the community centre. The building had opened on the 20th of May 1978 and was built by Ivan Gilbert, but the idea had been brewing for a decade, with Carlton residents raising a quarter of the building costs themselves. Over the years, the community centre has hosted everything from toddlers groups and aerobics to over 60s clubs and judo. And don't forget the once-a-month Thursday night disco, which did mean missing Top of the Pops and EastEnders, but nobody seemed to mind. The youth club was always popular, run first by Kenny and Joyce Smith and later by Peter and Anne Hurren, giving countless Carlton teenagers somewhere to spend their Thursday nights. Z is for zoo. You might be surprised to learn that Carlton Coval had its very own zoo. Well, almost. The man behind the idea was Albert Bird, better known as Dickie Bird. He bought Headley House in 1962, opened a riding school there 2 years later, and donated a meadow to the East Anglia Transport Museum when it opened in 1965. But Dickie had an even bigger dream. He wanted to build a zoo in the fields behind Headley House. Not everyone shared his enthusiasm, though. Local residents had their doubts, and he couldn't convince the parish council either. Eastern Counties buses were up for it, though. They were so confident crowds would flock to see the animals that they even added Carlton Zoo to some of their destination blinds. In the end, though, the zoo never arrived, although Kessingland did get its wildlife park in 1969. So Carlton Coval had to be satisfied with something rather different. Right here on our doorstep, the 1,000-acre Carlton Marshes Nature Reserve, where amazing wildlife has been with us all along.